Alright, so while I was working on the Don't Sleep on Sakura, I couldn't help but be reminded at just how disgusting this weapon is. I think it's about that time. The Gem Sword of ZELRETCH, which also takes after his name. It is the main weapon belonging to ZELRETCH, who is in fact one of the top mages. He is the top mage for most. He is a wielder of the second magic. There isn't too many people that you can put in the conversation with this dude. So going back to the route, you have a point in the story where they have to go up against Sakura, and they have nothing on their side to rival that level of power. That is until Rin tosses out the idea of replicating the Gem Sword of ZELRETCH. You have Ilya, who brought up the fact that the reason she even knows about the Gem Sword is because the Tosakas were good with ZELRETCH, and although he didn't pass the actual weapon down, he passed down the original blueprint to create the weapon. Very interesting take on his part, because it assumes that they would even have the resources for them to make the weapon. Rin says herself that they'd be lucky if they were able to reproduce even half of its original power. Conceptually, it functions just like a kaleidoscope, that being that it reflects mirror images upon itself to give the person endless possibilities. Except in his case, instead of reflecting just images or light, it's reflecting entire parallel worlds, at least the energy that comes from those worlds. And considering just how many hypothetical timelines there could be for Fate Stay Night, it essentially makes the energy that it pulls from infinite. That's how ridiculous this is. It's flat out broken, and that's just scratching the surface. It's mostly known for its absurd powers being enough to stop the falling moon. This was, of course, ZELRETCH's grand battle with the Crimson Moon, aka Type Moon, one of the ultimate ones. Before the Beast class was even a thing, you had the ultimate ones. These used to be the end all be all. The moon itself is a celestial body. It's practically alive. During the war that ZELRETCH had against the moon, it said that the moon had to resort to drastic measures. So it projected an entire mirror image of itself and attempted to dunk the entire thing on planet Earth. ZELRETCH was the one who resorted to his gem sword and created an ether cannon that was enough to push the entire projected moon back and stop it. He did all of this just by using the power of his gem sword. After that, he got bit by the moon and became a dead apostle, at least in the Tsukihime world, but you get the gist. And now you can understand why it's so busted. Throughout the story, it's shown tremendous power, completely obliterating all of Sakura's shadows. By this point in the story, Sakura's energy level had already reached 1 trillion and was stated to have enough energy to power a department from the Mages Association for 100 years straight. Of course, she couldn't put all this energy out at once because she has capacities, but the idea of the matter is that these shadows were drawing from an energy that was abundant. It's no wonder that these same shadows were stated to rival the level of a noble phantasm in terms of power. That tells us more about the gem sword. This is relative. This is 2004. Nasu isn't talking about phantasms from Grand Order, which doesn't even exist yet. This implies the phantasms that we have at hand. We're talking about Gabolg, Bellerophon, Zabania, extremely powerful stuff. And the story is vividly telling us that this sword is chopping right through that. The replication of this sword tells us a lot of things. First of all, it tells us about ZELRETCH's power. He's the one that made the sword. It's not like he just found it somewhere or he picked up another weapon and tried to modify it. He did this on his own merits. There is an entire institution in Fate designated for creating these types of mystic codes, that being Atlas Academy. We're talking about geniuses, whole teams of people that have been studying their entire lives in order to do this. And he just pulls it off by himself as far as we know. Another thing that it showcases is that he truly has a level of clairvoyance, and it further confirms his time travel. Back in the novel, Rin herself has stated that she cannot do projections. It's just not their thing. And their family isn't one that's into making things. So even though they had his favor, why would you pass down the blueprint of such a weapon if you know they had no method of using it? Unless you knew that they would meet somebody that could, that being Shiro. This dude ZELRETCH can straight up hop timelines. The weapon is already stated to be made from technology that's beyond our own. In Ataraxia, we find out that he has a cell phone in his chest that Rin used to call an alternate version of herself that was 3 years in the future. So that's one thing. 2, it tells us a lot about Shuro's potential. Although the projection that he made was looked at as a cheap knockoff, Shuro still pulled it off. He recreated the sword, nearly forfeiting his own life, and he only had Archer's arm to pull from to boot. The fact that he was able to make this is huge, and you start to realize why Nasu said he would be in the top 100 when he goes to the association. Ren 2. And then the third thing that it tells us about is Ren. The sword was only meant to be wielded by him, at least at the time. Pulling that much energy at once has to be extremely taxing, even if it's the sword that's supposed to be doing most of the work. Again, the novel itself said that Ren's arm was literally being ripped apart every time that she decided to use it. And as we saw from the adaptation, she was forced to let off these shots a countless amount of times. Now, is it still the strongest mystic code? Well, that depends on what you mean by strongest. It's definitely, without question, one of the best mystic codes in terms of utility. You might be thinking, okay, well, who's the contenders? That would have to be the 7 taboos, the 7 super weapons that were created by Atlas that are capable of destroying the world. So far, we've only seen a few of these weapons, one of them being the Black Barrel. You could say that the Black Barrel is better. We've seen it take down whole guys when that shouldn't have been possible, but keep in mind MASH had to get a ton of buffs and modifiers on top of already being a servant just to make it stick the way that it's supposed to. You have prep time, all of that matters. Black Barrel, at least the new version, has a lot of prep time, whereas we saw from the fake version of ZELRETCH's sword, Ren was just dishing it out. ZELRETCH, on the other hand, who stands as a human, at least at the time that he was participating in the fight, he had no buffs, again as far as we know, and he still took down the Crimson Moon. The Crimson Moon is basically a god. All the ultimate ones are basically gods. They're just those type of entities. He's the father of all the vampires in the verse. Archetype Earth, coming over from the Tsukihime world. A lot of people wanted me to talk about that. Archetype Earth, Arkaway, is beaming majority of the verse. There's a reason why she was brought into FGO around the endgame. That's not an accident, okay? That's not an accident. And that's her father. So when you take all that into account, technically it's still better. Even in Heaven's Field, you can see this sword being used to solidify Justice as the foundation of the Grail. I think the only thing that could rival the gem sword at this point is the taboos that we haven't seen. It could be that unidentified blade. For all we know, that could be the Vorpal blade, the blade that's never been seen but has a passive effect against unworldly beings. You never know. At this point, Nasu really just needs to release the full details on the Crimson Moon battle, because we still don't have them. Everything that we have is fragmented. We learn a little bit about the fight. We learn what time it took place. We learn about who was there. Just give the people what they want. Give us what we want. But I guess that is the allure about it. It keeps you guessing.